Chapter 31, The White Tomb. Chapter text bit of a random warning, but one I feel I should say all the same. I've never been to a funeral. I've had the chance several times, but the idea of sitting around crying in a room full of people crying has never sat well with me. Pun intended. I've always felt better remembering the good of a person's life, even if I did have lingering questions about them, and so that's the only way I know how to portray the following. I do apologize if anyone feels I'm misrepresenting anything important to them. I mean it in no way offensive. By the time you are reading this, I shall be in my deep, dark cave of binging. If there's a delay on replying to you guys, it's because of this. HP. Lily came back to herself with a small shake. It took her eyes a few minutes to focus before she caught that look on her son's face, and forcing the panic aside for just what was going through his mind, she gently offered, "Would you like to take a break, love? We've had a long day." "No," he murmured back quietly. He just wanted to finish this as soon as possible, slip away before they had a chance to say otherwise. "Well, there mustn't be that much left at this point," Sirius said fairly, even as he shifted uncomfortably and looked longingly towards the yard. Was it too much to ask that they go back outside and just run around and have some fun? Just give the book a toss to Mooney pup, and we can hopefully be done with this in the next hour. Harry's hands tensed along the pages, but he gave in with the next sigh. He couldn't bring himself to argue with anyone, not now. "That has happened to you so many times. I don't know if I'm jealous or worried," James huffed. Remus still stuttered uncomfortably over that, considering it had been over a week, and he still couldn't really speak normally about prongs in this context. He doubted that was going to go away any time soon. "You know, I think I'm actually starting to like that kid again." Sirius smirked. "Getting into an argument with someone, is that all it took?" Lily smiled. "With his mother," Sirius emphasized, considering it had been this one arguing with Harry that had annoyed him in the first place. Remus had to clear his throat before he got that out with the proper respect it deserved, but manage it he did, some part of him still expecting every wizard in the world to turn up for such an event. "Oh, right, back when you dying in some tournament was our biggest concern," James muttered. "Ooh," Lily sighed, but at least she was almost smiling with happiness again. Hagrid really needed a friend right now. Joys of that map really coming in handy, Harry told, which admittedly doesn't have to be their business, James sighed. "Considering all the trouble they've caused you, I certainly wouldn't trust them or want their help." Lily's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in on her son. He cringed into his seat, waiting for the explosion, but she spoke calmly. "And just what do you mean by that?" "That I'm going to break up with her." He didn't bother with preamble, but he didn't elaborate either any further than saying, "And it's not because I don't think I deserve her or something." She stared at him for a few moments more with narrowed eyes. The boys all watched the standoff, knowing they'd back Lily in a heartbeat, but to their surprise, she nodded and turned back to Remus. James turned to Harry anyways to ask just what that was all about then, but Harry quickly said, "Just trust me, you'll find out soon." He was confident his mum had believed him and just let it go, otherwise he'd already be getting an earful for the decision he'd made. Except he got his all at once, whereas Moody got his over time. Can't decide which is worst, honestly. Sirius frowned. "Think you could use a polyjuice potion on Bill now? Or would the effects not work on him because of the same contamination?" Lily pondered aloud. "Let's not give a reason to find out," Remus muttered in disgust. She flinched and quickly agreed. "I thought that was just a Mooney thing, honestly," James smirked. "Ever since I've known him, he's too lazy to wait for his food to be cooked all the way. How you two survive outside this house, as neither of you can feed yourselves, is beyond me," Lily sniffed. "Why do you think they're over here so much?" James answered for them. "It's not for my company any more, dear." She managed a chuckle while the two gave Prongs traitorous looks. "Gives you more chances to practice that French accent, so everyone wins," James smiled. Yes, stunning, breathtaking, and beautiful are clearly all things you have no interest in," Sirius snickered. "Ginny's all of those and more," Harry said at once with a genuine scowl. "You're not helping yourself, Harry," James bust out laughing. "I'm starting to get worried there's not going to be anyone left," Remus muttered under his breath, causing Lily to wince at the truth in that. Lily flinched again in pure disgust for having to hear that name, while Remus could barely say it in an intelligible voice. James and Sirius scowls now looked quite deranged. It was clear they wanted to make him suffer for doing this, but Harry could only clench tight in pain, the nausea rolling through him once more of a memory he couldn't grasp. It troubled him greatly why he wouldn't be feeling the same now. Had something happened to him? Was he really sick? He certainly couldn't imagine what more there was to learn about this. Well, I'd hope so, Sirius got out through only slightly gritted teeth. I'd be worried if she had a serious look on her face or something. Quit inserting yourself into this, you arse, James sighed, even if he would willingly admit to wanting to hear of nothing more than that. Sirius went a very interesting color, and it wasn't even one Harry recognized. He must have made it up on the spot. Sirius, do you know who that is? Harry instantly demanded, heart hammering painfully inside of him. Everyone was looking at him now, and he swallowed convulsively for once in his life at such a thing making him nervous. He couldn't lie, though, but the words would not come to him, so he hoarsely managed. I've an idea. Feel like enlightening us. Lily prompted as Harry's eyes nearly fell out of his skull. Not particularly, no, he said in the quietest voice any of them had ever heard. The problem was, he almost wished his first instinct was wrong, that those initials belonged to someone else, because none of this made any sense the longer he thought about it. His pathetic kid brother had been killed trying to get himself out of Voldemort's service. He'd heard it from an irrefutable enough source he'd told Harry and Remus about it. So how would Regulus even know of these Horcruxes, unless he'd somehow helped to make them? Had this been what he'd gotten cold feet over doing? But then why had he taken it away and announced he was going to destroy it? Was he in fact still working under the Dark Lord's orders? If he could, he'd leave right now and track down that little idiot to find out. But he couldn't, and so he was left to do nothing but wonder and keep it as close to himself as he could. He'd never liked discussing his blood to the other marauders, and that hadn't changed when one had been under his nose at school. Lily looked to James for some kind of answer for all this, but he merely shook his head. This wasn't even revenge for keeping that half-blood prince title a secret. It was to protect Sirius from something far worse than an old-school nickname. Sirius was already looking horrid at the possibility of all this. He wasn't going to make his friend feel worse by putting it all out when they could be entirely wrong. She next looked to Remus, but he was eyeing Sirius now with an expression she was finally happy to see, even if it infuriated her further. His eyes were calculating. He was mouthing something to himself before he looked again at Sirius in surprise. She huffed and crossed her arms. She was so very clearly missing something, but didn't argue any more than Harry when things kept moving. They'd just have to be patient then. Harry had already felt both of his parents turning to him in concern at the beginning of that, and by the end, when Remus stuttered off in surprise, he took a deep breath and braced himself for this backlash. You're an idiot, Sirius told him conversationally. Took the words right out of my mouth, James agreed with a heavy eye roll. As if you could ditch Ron and Hermione, Remus said, with a very hard look at him, not bothering at all to finish enunciating who else he wasn't just slipping off. Harry was honestly surprised. He'd expected much more yelling and protesting, possible barricades on the door. Instead, he couldn't stop himself smiling and just shaking his head, relief practically overflowing out of him before the surprise had even registered. And don't you forget it, Lily finished, somehow still hoping, at least now it was this being the last time such a thing passed through her son's head. You've always been a vivid dreamer. Sirius shivered in mild disgust of that being his whole thoughts now. His pup really did need his friends. At this point, I'd be worried for her health if she didn't. James tried for a laugh, even if his stomach was curling with worry just what Hermione had found. An old record of Regulus somewhere in there. Had she connected him to Harry's godfather already? He definitely hoped it in fact was someone else, though. He hated the idea of any more of Sirius' family being mentioned. Damn, Lily sighed, her mind whirling with the possibilities. If maybe Harry was wrong, and those weren't initials at all but some other hidden message or secret he'd have to inevitably figure out. Why did he think he could ditch his friends and figure all this out himself again? Wow. Sirius drew the word out very, very long and as dramatically as he could, anger coloring every extended syllable. He had to sit here and watch Lily flinch at the mention of that again, and Harry to tense up with his own anger, just so Hermione could say she was right again. Oh, leave her be, Harry sighed at once. He had no wish to live through two arguments at once. I wouldn't know half the things I do if it weren't for her dedication. I can't complain when it rubs me the wrong way. He tried to insist, while shaking off the anger he felt for her to prove his point. Sirius scoffed, not looking very convinced. 6 years later, and she'd never learned when someone didn't want to be talked to. A snort of surprise shot out of Remus before he could control himself, but he instantly felt guilty and gave Lily a look saying as much. She was ignoring them all anyways. Lily flinched again, tucking her feet up beneath her now and leaning as far back in her seat as she could. Harry winced as well for his harsh words indirectly pointed at her and tried to mutter an apology, but she swiftly shook her head and snapped. I don't need anyone's apologizes. It's my own fault for choosing to be as blind as I was for so long. I don't need the connections highlighted, thank you. She took a careful breath at the end to stop herself from continuing, trying her hardest not to shout at those who didn't deserve it. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she was still trying to erase her childhood from her mind, and she didn't need distractions right now. Then Lily met her son's eye, the wave passing between them invisible to anyone else. The fantastical idea the two people could be sharing the exact same feelings so many years apart not lost on them as they commiserated this together. Self-incrimination was never his thing, James muttered. Yeah, still not clear on why he did that, Remus sighed. Same reason I haven't looked at mine in over 5 years, probably, Lily muttered. It was still at the bottom of her school trunk where she'd buried it at the end of her 5th year. That was really all the explanation they needed. The marauders weren't even sure if they could ever look at their map again without wanting to burn it. You had no reason to hurry, James quickly defended. He couldn't stand watching Lily beat herself up over this. He wouldn't let Harry too. Everything makes more sense when you go back and tell yourself what you should have done. Yeah, Harry muttered, not entirely sure if he agreed right now, but he did get a feeling it wouldn't have changed anything, so that helped a little. She's really got to stop contradicting herself. Sirius was clearly looking for someone to rag on close at hand. Evil's too strong a word, but he's a potential killer. That Prince book isn't right. Oh, I just thought it was a crappy sense of humor. Sirius. Harry burst in frustration. I don't have a go at you every time you do something I don't like. Sirius grudgingly closed his mouth and muttered an apology, too on edge to really mean it, but at least conceding she wasn't the one he really wanted to storm at. Lily couldn't help another noise of distress. The idea of her baby having to attend a funeral was not one she'd ever had to think of in his short time of life, and now here she was having to imagine it as him nearly a man. She was momentarily distracted when a large brown ball of fur plopped right into her lap, and she began stroking her cat and humming quietly to herself. She'd never been to a funeral either, though she'd had reason enough in the past few years of knowing so many students who never came back from break. None of them were looking forward to hearing of this one. Everybody flinched like a stab to the gut at that reminder, Harry's anger at Sirius dissipating at once. He couldn't believe he ever wasted a breath on anything except telling his godfather how much he missed him, but he couldn't bring himself to say that now either. He just leaned into him and waited for the ache in his chest to die down once more. James clenched and unclenched his hands painfully before moving to ruffle his hair and say brazenly, I'd be worried if you did. Not natural to keep looking for an answer you already know. Sirius gave him a genuine chuckle for his efforts. I'd be worried if it were anything else, Remus muttered. Sirius' lip curled with disdain. He'd have burned the thing if it were him, and he didn't at all like the feeling of that minister taking on any idea of Snape, no matter how unintentional it likely was. James brushed his hand through his hair. He was just too exhausted to feel the anger at Percy for him continuing to stick to such a stupid choice. He was a stubborn git, but not the highest problem right now. Sirius felt a horrible itch in the back of his throat that he refused to scratch. His thoughts flickered to Molly, who would be attending this day as well with the knowledge of what could have just happened to one of her kids. Would Percy know, or care what had happened to his eldest brother? Probably get lost on the way to the bathroom without him holding their hand, Remus muttered. James shifted uncomfortably as he remembered back to the first few days of hearing of this full-grown Snape. He'd actually felt much the same. That was long gone now, but he could easily see how Harry would be feeling the same. No child should be forced into this life. He could almost imagine if Harry had reached out and tried to save Malfoy, like he'd done for Sirius, how different things could have been. Sirius shivered and leaned in closer to Prongs, the same thing going through his own mind. He had half a mind to go kidnap Draco from those useless Malfoys before they got their kid mixed up in this mess. The wasteless lumps didn't deserve a child if this is what they had set in store for him. Then he couldn't breathe for a moment, as he didn't think himself any better. He'd never tried to do anything for Regulus in the same, but had left him behind when his friend offered him another life. Draco had chosen this as much as his brother, but the questions now clamoring around in his mind for the answers to all this felt just as horrible to think about. Lily chuckled softly as she murmured he got credit for trying with that get-up. Sirius actually let out a squeal of delight. Finally, something was going right. Remus stuttered that in surprise. He didn't hear Lily and James laughing and affectionately telling him it was about time, or even Sirius rolling his eyes and muttering whatever made him happy. It wasn't even he'd never been with anyone. Even his shortest relationships had outmatched Sirius' longest. Really, it was just the idea he'd given himself a chance again. The idea of moving on from this life around him and starting one with someone else that didn't feel possible right now. Instead, he began to brace himself for the inevitable. Tonks would grow tired of him, or something would happen to her, and so he refused to let anyone think on this any longer than he was. Harry felt the past 16 years of his life shimmering before his eyes now, everything he'd had to learn again over the past 2 weeks, all colliding with this one moment. It was not an ending he'd ever expected, and somehow there was still more to come. James caught Harry's eye and gave him the proudest smile he could. His son was so lucky to have such friends, even ones he hadn't even realized. The expression dropped the moment his boy looked away, and he couldn't help a forlorn look at the door as he wished all of his friends had remained as such. Just how many funerals had Remus gone to now, every one of them alone before this? His heart swelled for Tonks. He most definitely needed to find some way to thank that girl for making sure Moony didn't have to again. Remus couldn't help but stare at that for a moment, wondering at just how genuine that was. Fudge had feared Dumbledore's position for so long. Had he tried to make amends before this? Had Dumbledore accepted? They all went stiff in disgust at the mention of her again. Scrimgeour's casual mention of her over Harry's last Christmas break had been bad enough, but for her to actually be wandering around, back at that school again, as if things weren't troublesome enough at that place without someone allowing that to pass back through the gates. Remus' voice, already wobbly at best trying to get through all of this with a brave face, finally found something to turn steel over. The icy cold hatred, as he managed to keep going, was almost as bad as his somber tone before. Sirius, who could not restrain a joke even on his best day, let alone knowing anyone would need a laugh at a funeral, began jibbing at once. A troll, a hag, and a leprechaun all go into a bar. Sirius, you already told that joke. Remus tried to politely interrupt with no real force. He only wished Sirius could still be there by his side to repeat jokes the rest of his life. Sirius ignored him anyways and kept going on the same breath, and the bartender asks, "What will it be today, Umbridge?" He smirked, considering it mission accomplished as he watched everyone around him at least give him a forced chuckle. James fought the urge to spit in disgust. No one could even crack a smile for the women's plight in seeing her once captors again. They'd still have left her there, so they wouldn't have to think of this happening again. I like to think at least some of those were, Lily sighed. Not everything had to be politics. Was it Fox again? Remus asked, and Harry looked at him in concern as he heard the same thing James and Sirius had been since Dumbledore's death. Remus didn't sound like he was asking a question the way he always had, but more like he was obliged to say something. No, Harry answered automatically as he kept inspecting him. The previous feeling he'd had of never seeing that phoenix again still held. Dumbledore's beloved and faithful creature had said his own goodbyes and would not stick around for the human's memoriam of him. This noise was something very much other, one he only vaguely recognized, but was sure should ring some kind of bell nonetheless. Lily was now having to fight off the urge to take the book away from Remus. As much pain as she was in for having to live with the knowledge of who had been the cause of all this, at least she was trying to force herself to adjust to thinking in this way. Remus still seemed so locked in on himself. He clearly gave no care for the answer provided, nor any insight of how interesting that genuinely was for merpeople of all beings to feel such a thing for a wizard. James couldn't imagine a world where that wasn't true of every living soul. Surely even Voldemort would mourn the loss of his greatest rival. There was practically no challenge now, except Harry Sirius made such a deep, scathing noise he actually hurt his throat. Let the man grieve how he wished. It wasn't as if half of them actually were. "Oh," Lily murmured, with a little bubble of warmth again. She hadn't thought about Grot much at all, but was so grateful Hagrid still had some form of connection to cling to. It was a blessing Maxime was still there for him, but being on separate continents, well, this made Lily feel even just a bit better Hagrid had someone closer at home. Both James and Sirius released surprised little snorts of laughter, Padfoot trying to egg this on by reminding Prongs of another funeral where all the chairs were charmed to vibrate any time the word pass was used. It had not been any of the three present marauders' idea to liven up the place in such a way, but they were mourning something above them now and hoped Harry would understand why it had been done. Lily tisked for that, and now eyed her boys, hopefully to continue. If she did have to hear of a funeral for the first time, she wouldn't want it any other way than her family making it as alive as possible. Harry was startled when James and Sirius released unrestrained laughter, his dad sounding shaky but completely sincere. "You're remembering him how he'd want to be," Sirius sighed. Who would have ever thought they'd miss hearing of such a carefree Dumbledore before the seeds of doubt were sown on his true nature regarding someone so important to them? They still felt as if they had a million questions regarding what Dumbledore had done to Harry's life, and yet they could still genuinely mourn the idea of his passing at any point in time. Sirius grasped Harry's shoulder as he told him in a tight voice, "Sure, there's always going to be more. Doesn't mean you shouldn't value the things you did manage to say to him." He could still vividly remember Dumbledore tearing up as Harry proclaimed himself Dumbledore's man. He knew how much that would mean to their old headmaster the same way it did to him every time Harry turned to smile at him, just as he did now. "One thing I do regret you not asking is how and why he did get Umbridge out," James said pointedly, since it was on the mind. "Merlin, can I still ask him that now, or do you think it would be too out of context?" "Hey, Dunderbore, if I ever got caught in the forest by a herd of angry centaurs, how would you get me out unscathed?" Sirius played along. "Nah, seems perfectly in line with that time I asked him if werewolves preferred to spend the full moon humping things all night. This one's even a bit more practical," Lily conceded, all of them now eyeing Remus in hopes he'd snap at Sirius for implying such a stupid thing. He was still ignoring them, and kept going as soon as the silence lingered. Sirius looked quite proud for a moment. He hoped this would always be Harry's takeaway from such never-ending problems in his godson's life. Then Sirius released a pained gasp, as if he'd just been kicked in his soul, a shiver of regret pulling from his core. Some part of him still hated himself for leaving Harry like he did, even if no part of him could really find a way to regret how he'd been destined to leave that world. Lily had ached to be there for her child for so long, she was starting to feel it would never fade. That even now, when she went up the stairs to soothe her infant, she'd never be able to bear him from her arms again for fear he'd grow up thinking the same thing. James watched Lily rock Hickory in her arms, a gift from him to his then fiancée. He longed to go to her or find some comfort for his son, but he could no longer shake how false it would feel to them. He'd never really been able to help anyone, and Remus finding the breath to say all of this was only confirming the idea. Harry startled in his seat much like he had then, knowing he'd lunge into those flames in a heartbeat and still try to find some way to save his only headmaster. Sirius roped an easy arm around him and whispered in his ear to wait, and Harry felt an echo of that in years past, some part of him still knowing what Sirius would have done for him in that moment. Of course no one there would have let such a thing happen. It was a beautiful thing, no one could have denied that, but they each couldn't help but see the wrong color. The pure white resting in their mind should have been the brilliant red of his life, or the blue like his eyes. White, the pale, perfect body he now was, held no connection for them. Sirius shifted about as his stomach still twisted up into painful knots, even as the idea passed through his head to wish aloud something as cool as that happening at his funeral. Harry watched as everyone around him rolled their eyes and gave him a very obvious look of how much they approved of this. James even going so far as to mutter his son was probably going to die because he hadn't brought another intelligent person along. But Harry ignored them and kept his back straight. He did not regret this decision. "I hope you're taking notes, Mooney," James told conversationally. Harry told Ginny this without her falling into a depressing version of herself. Remus, predictably at this point, even if it was no less pleasant to see instead of his lively friend returning, ignored him. "And you breaking up with her solves that because," Lily demanded in confusion. "That entire school and their parents know you've been dating her, at least Malfoy if you're worried about Voldemort somehow knowing about your loved ones." Harry made to argue the point, but Lily shook her head in defeat before he could even get started. "I'm not arguing the point, love. I'm just worried you're going to end up like Remus. You keep trying to distance yourself from people's life because you're worried about them. You're never going to let people in again." Remus scowled heavily at her, about ready to walk out of the room if the lot of them didn't shut up about how he spent his life, and quickly tried to finish before either could continue this now. "Oh, nope. That seems like a vague memory now, back when Harry was 12 and didn't even know the difference between boys' and girls' bathrooms," Sirius sighed. "You didn't even realize you had a thing for her until you caught her snogging with someone else," James reminded. "What's this year's? Think if you caught her and Neville at the Yule Ball you'd have said something earlier." "I wish he would have saved us all those problems with Cho," Lily agreed. "Because you knew he'd break up with you. Mooney, find yourself a girl like this instead. You'd both be so much happier." Sirius couldn't help tagging in just to further annoy him now, which was working wonderfully. Remus was almost reading through clenched teeth now, and not thinking about Dumbledore's death as much. "I'm going to miss Ginny. She's very handy in adding, and what a noble git you so often are." Sirius rolled his eyes. "You really think you can just sneak off from them?" James agreed with a scoff. "Hardly," Harry rolled his eyes, knowing instead the train ride home would have to be their real departure. He'd just have to convince everyone, until then there wasn't going to be an after. He chose not to elaborate on that, even if he could tell they all knew what was on his mind. "What are you waiting on?" James asked in surprise. His son seemed as determined as they were of what was going to happen. "To turn 17, he sighed, seeing the flash of understanding in them and no happier about his own. "One last trip to the Dursleys." "Yes," all four muttered. There wasn't as much ire in them as they would have expected. It was too dampened by the surroundings Harry found himself in, but his presence was still no more pleasant. "Get right to the point, something those politicians never understand," Lily agreed. "Being devastated may excuse rudeness, but babbling doesn't." Sirius rolled his eyes. Hickory meowed at Lily, twisting uncomfortably in her arms until she loosened her hold a bit. "He expect pleasantries to make you more up to a chat," Remus muttered in confusion. He usually found that more likely to have a conversation meet a quick end. "That's news to me," Sirius happily parroted Harry, still trying his hardest to get the boy to smile far more than he was. It wasn't working as well as he'd hoped, but he'd yet let a thing like that bruise his ego. He'd just keep trying. "Please have that call Fox to you again. I really want something to burst into flames," James sighed. Harry expected them to tell him to at least consider this offer before going off on his own hair-brained idea, but was surprised to see each of them roll their eyes. He suddenly vividly recalled where each of them stood on the war in this time, not with the Ministry, but an organization unto itself, trying to stop Voldemort by their own means. "Love it," James told Harry with something like a smile and a grimace mixed together. "Not a comparison I'd ever consider laughing at, but," Sirius trailed off with a bit of a rude snicker anyways. The more he heard of Scrimgeour, the more he disliked him. These people never changed no matter what happened around them. "You have a very specific talent of doing that to people associated with the Ministry," James told him conversationally. "I'm so proud." Lily narrowed her eyes for every one of those people. Was it beyond all of them to show some sympathy for that man crying for his loss? "Best solution I think he's ever had," Sirius nodded. "Don't be ridiculous, Pads. Knocking out the troll was still better," James smirked. "And he actually went through with that one, so I'm still not seeing the problem," Remus snickered. James and Sirius finally relaxed and smiled at each other. Happy beyond words they could still get some normal reaction out of their Mooney, even if they'd keep pushing at the rest of him later. James sighed in defeat. He'd already understood this one coming, but it didn't stop him saying, "I still don't understand why you can't wait one more year. Sit around doing homework when I'm the only one who can stop this from happening," Harry tried his hardest to say without snapping back. "Do NEWTS for a career I have no hope of even thinking of until this is done. I'm just saying, you don't even know where these things are. Maybe do a little more digging while coming and going from school. I'm convinced McGonagall will let you get away with murder or something so long as you still attend next year." Dumbledore was doing both at once, Lily agreed. "I can't imagine even focusing on anything else," Harry insisted. Remus kept going then just to stop his friends retaliating. Harry had already done this, and there was no point arguing with him on what they wish he'd done. Everyone turned to him in surprise for that. Something about that place tugging at the edge of their mind they had a bad connection to, but Remus finished in a dead sort of voice. James' voice failed him, his face devoid of any emotion. "I completely forget it was mentioned we were living there," Lily whispered, looking absently around her house, as if she were determined to memorize every inch of wall this moment. "I really didn't think Harry would find a way to get more depressing than Dumbledore's funeral. He's proved me wrong again," Remus whispered. Sirius was chewing back words of equal distress, and a multitude of questions he had for all that, wishing he hadn't been so locked in on himself back when that was mentioned when Harry first arrived. He was not looking forward to getting the chance again. Harry looked at his hands for a long time. He could still remember his parents' words trying to protest this, and now the silence hanging around him felt even more than words could. Yet thinking he was going to do it, and the act itself were two very different things, and he clenched his fingers into a tight fist as he still wondered just what they would think of him when all was said and done. That I actually cannot wait to hear of, Remus couldn't help but think, but kept that one even more carefully to himself. He didn't care what Lily said or did. When Snape's eventual death came, it would hit her hardest of all. "Are you really surprised?" Sirius muttered in confusion. "Had to give them the option to say no, didn't I?" Harry said, with the smallest of smiles on his face, the image of the two holding each other still hovering in the forefront of his mind as he instead distanced himself from Ginny in that same moment. His friends had always existed in a world he never could. "As if you could get along without them through even half of it," James snorted. "I give it a week before you go knocking on Hermione's door with a question, and then go find Ron as backup for whatever plan you concoct." Harry couldn't even deny it. No matter his set course from moments ago in his mind, even with the knowledge of everything he'd had to face on his own, he'd still always had his friends to turn around to when it was all over. "Ah, yes, the most important event of the century, obviously," Sirius burst out laughing. "With all the build-up it has, it had better be the most damned entertaining thing in the rest of your life," James agreed. "As if it could outdo yours," Remus rolled his eyes. Honestly, it had even been less than Prong's wanting, considering the fool had wanted Lily to ride in on his back and reveal his animagus status that day. Lily tisked at the very idea while muttering to herself at least she had something good to look forward to. "Fleur would take down Voldemort herself just to make sure you attend," Lily agreed with a snicker. "And that about sums up how life should be," Sirius sighed, patting Harry gently on the back once more. Harry spent a long moment to just smile around at him, at them all, still trying to savor these moments he had with them while they could last. HP, another one bites the dust. That was not a joke about another character dying, but my finishing another book. But now I'm worried about how accurate that is. This line is actually funny as hell when you realize in the movies that Domhnall Gleeson and Brendan Gleeson, Bill and Mad-Eye respectively, are in fact father and son. I'll be honest, I didn't plan on finishing this so early. I was looking more towards a mid-July completion so that when I posted the last book in October, the wait wouldn't be so many months apart. Then I had so many problems and delays with this book, I rallied to finish so early. But I still want to wait until Halloween to post the last book. Hate me, I know, but my poetic justice is flaring hard, and I've got some other things I've been really wanting to do, not to mention it'll still take some time for me to get the last book all set in order. As always, feel free to contact me at any time for an update. If I don't reply within 24 hours, please don't assume I'm dead. probably just got hurt again. It really does happen more often than I like to admit. I love you all, each and every one of you, so much. Thoughts on Half-Blood Prince? I said this was my least favorite book of the series, and that still holds true for me. It honestly felt like J.K. went in and decided where to place all of that riddle information, and everything that happened in between felt inconsequential. Yet I'm not denying that I love it any less either. It's just that the mystery never felt as present as it did in all the other books. I also have no feeling of rereadability like I do for every other book, because what new information does pop up is either character background for Riddle or just some interesting side notes. That Malfoy plotline still bothers me to this day, and I just don't have any particular feelings for any of the romance that kept cropping up in this book, even Ron and Hermione's, which I get far more out of in every other book. Yet, I can't call it skippable in the series because of so many things that do happen. I don't know. This book more than any other just feels like setup for the last one, whereas the others feel like stand alone, yet beautifully intertwined with each other. Hope that never came across while reading this. I really did still enjoy it, and I hope you did too. 610.